Do you have an opinion on universal basic income?
Depends on the context. It was proposed in very different ways. So when Milton Friedman proposed it and advocated it, it was in order to destroy the social welfare system. That was the quid pro quo. We have UBI, we get rid of welfare, benefits, and so on. That's a level of cruelty so savage that it's hard to find words for it. I mean, some single mother with no income and maybe an autistic kid has different needs from me. The UBI says we don't care. They're all going to get the same little bit. That's sheer savagery. Now that's the right-wing support for UBI. There's another approach. Let's put it within a system of social justice that cares for people's needs and rights. Then it can be a cushion that people can use, maybe young people can use, maybe somebody out of work can use to get to the next stage in life. Then it makes sense. Makes a lot of difference what the context is. You can't just be for or against it.
So I recently had David Shore on my podcast. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was an in-house consultant with Obama and has been, he's a political data scientist who's worked on how to elect Democrats for probably 10 years or so now, a sort of Nate Silver type. And he made an interesting argument about the influence of money in politics. I think many people, myself included, have tended to assume in the past decade at least that in the Democratic Party, if not in both parties, the effect of money, the net effect of money in politics is to get politicians to support more, libertarian economic policies. But what David Shore informed me is that at least in the past few years, so much of money in politics comes from quote unquote small donors, most of whom are actually, fairly affluent people, speaking generally. And the net result of that money is actually to move Democrats to the left on economic issues, because the average small donor is actually left of the median Democrat voter. But he argued that despite money actually now pulling Democrats to the left, there's a general pro-business culture which pulls them to the right, because it's not good for any politician to be seen as bad for business. Do you have any picture of what you think the influence of money in politics is, and on David Shore's contention?
Well, first of all, there is careful study of this, detailed, careful analysis. The most extensive work actually is that of Thomas Ferguson, political scientist, who has done most of his career has been devoted to working on this topic way back to the 19th century. He's proposed, he's carried it forward to the present, to the current, not 2020 yet, but to the 2016 and later elections. And it turns out that there's a remarkable correlation between funding and the positions taken by the representatives, which move to the right. Now, and that goes right through 2016. It's careful analysis. With Congress, it's almost a straight line. The higher the funding, the greater the electability, the more the effect on following the policies of the funders. Now, when you talk about the small donors, remember that if you're a party manager, you don't really care about the individual small donors. You care about the concentrated power of the big donors. If you're elected to Congress, Suppose you're elected. Suppose you ran for Congress and you were elected. One of the first things you'd be doing would be calling the big donors, the big ones, not the small ones, to make sure that they're going to fund you in the next election. No use calling thousands of small donors. Can't do that. You can contact the major ones. They're the ones who are going to have the overwhelming influence, even if the total numbers are the same. I mean, that's just automatic. And so what you have is congressional representatives, say you're elected to the House. Almost after your election, you're on the phone starting to make sure that the big donors will be around the next time you run. Meanwhile, huge numbers of corporate lobbyists are swarming into your office to have appointments with your staff. The staff might be young progressives, but they're overwhelmed by the corporate lobbyists for obvious reasons. Scale, resources, background, So what you end up with legislation representing pretty much the concerns and interests of the big donors, signed later by the representative. Now, there are studies of the outcome of this. So a major study just came out with one of the top research institutions, I forget which one. It wasn't, as far as I know, it was reported only in the London Financial Times, the main business journal. It's a very interesting study if you read it. It showed that about 90% of the population, lower 90%, are almost unrepresented. Their attitudes and opinions don't show up in legislation. What matters is the opinions and attitudes of the top 10%, and that means the top fraction of the top 10% where the wealth is concentrated.